When a game ignited a conflict and revealed deep societal fault lines, they say wars begin over land, over ideology, over religion. But in 1969, a war began with a football match. A ball crossed a goal line, a crowd erupted, and beneath the cheers, something far older and far more dangerous was already awake. This is not the story of a game that caused a war. This is the story of a war that had been waiting for an excuse. To understand the football war, you must forget the scoreboard. You must look beneath the pitch, beneath the flags, beneath the chants, and into the pressure building inside two fragile societies. Because when the first shots were fired between El Salvador and Honduras, they were not fired for football. They were fired for land, for dignity, for survival, and for decades of unresolved fear. In the 1960s, Central America was a region under strain. Its population was growing faster than its land could sustain. Its economies were fragile, unequal, and deeply divided. El Salvador was one of the most densely populated countries in the Americas. Most of its people lived on tiny plots of land, often less than a hectare. Land ownership was concentrated in the hands of a few powerful families. The countryside was crowded. Opportunity was scarce. Honduras, by contrast, appeared vast and underpopulated. Its borders were wide, its farmland looked open. To desperate Salvadorans, it seemed like a place of possibility. So they crossed. By the late 1960s, nearly 300,000 Salvadorans were living in Honduras. They farmed the land. They built homes. They worked quietly, often invisibly. But as Honduras itself began to feel economic pressure, those migrants were no longer seen as neighbors. They were seen as intruders. Land reform policies in Honduras aimed to redistribute land to Honduran citizens. Salvadoran migrants, many without formal documentation, became targets. Evictions began. Families were forced off land they had farmed for years. Fear spread. Resentment hardened. National identity sharpened into something brittle and defensive. This was the true battlefield. Long before any football match was played. Football, in Central America, was never just a sport. It was a ritual of belonging, a test of national pride, a public display of honor. When El Salvador and Honduras met on the pitch during World Cup qualifiers in 1969, they carried far more than jerseys and tactics with them. They carried history, humiliation, and unresolved anger. The first match was played in Tegucigalpa. Salvadoran players were harassed through the night. Crowds shouted threats. Sleep was impossible. When Honduras won, the victory felt like vindication. When El Salvador lost, it felt like an insult layered on existing wounds. The media did not calm the situation, it inflamed it. Newspapers framed matches as national struggles, losses were portrayed as humiliations inflicted by enemies, victories were framed as proof of superiority. Football stopped being a game. It became a proxy for everything people feared they were losing. The second match, played in San Salvador, was worse. Honduran fans were attacked. Violence spilled into the streets. National flags became symbols of threat rather than celebration. By the time the third match was played on neutral ground in Mexico City, the damage was already done. The final whistle did not bring closure. It brought confirmation. Both nations felt wronged. Both felt humiliated. Both believed they were defending something essential to their identity. And then, the borders ignited. In July 1969, El Salvador launched military action against Honduras. Planes crossed airspace. Troops crossed borders. Civilians fled in terror. The war lasted only 4 days. But in those 4 days, thousands were killed. Tens of thousands were displaced. Entire communities were shattered. It was not a war of conquest. It was a war of release. Years of tension exploded all at once. International organizations intervened quickly. A ceasefire was brokered. The fighting stopped. But the damage did not. Refugees returned to nothing. Economic pressure intensified. resentment became embedded in national memory. Football matches between the two nations remained charged for decades. Each game reopened old wounds. Each chant echoed unresolved history. Historians later agreed on a difficult truth. If football had not existed, something else would have triggered the war. A border dispute, a land reform, a political crisis. Football simply made the conflict visible, immediate, unavoidable. It transformed private resentment into public spectacle. This is the real lesson of the football war. Wars do not begin with events. They begin with conditions: economic inequality, demographic pressure, weak institutions, manipulated identity. When those forces collide, even a game can become a weapon. Civilizations are not destroyed only by armies. They are eroded by fear, by symbols, by stories people tell themselves about who belongs and who does not. A ball crossed a goal line in 1969, but what crossed the border that year was something far more dangerous: the belief that identity must be defended at any cost. And once that belief takes hold, even peace becomes fragile. This is why history matters. Not to remember scores, but to recognize patterns. Because the next war may not begin with a shot. It may begin with a symbol, a chant, a moment everyone underestimates. If you want history that goes beneath the surface, that reveals how human psychology shapes nations and conflicts, subscribe to Ages Explained. Here we don't just ask what happened, we ask why it was waiting to happen and why it still matters today.